Well, hello folks. You're looking in on a form of ham radio where we link internet YouTube live streaming with ham radio transmitting, which we start at 9:30 p.m. every Saturday night. This will be my last for the next week. Next Saturday I won't be here. My wife and I have lots of Christmas festivities to attend to, and we'll be actually having guests here. So I won't be on radio that night. That's next Saturday at the start of December. Or is it still November? It will be still November then, I think. These transmissions were started as a sort of a tradition by Tony Sanderson, the late Tony Sanderson, who had my call sign VK3AML back to 1966, and he instituted a program of transmitting regular crossband contacts with all sorts of interesting subjects covered. And I hope with the videos that I stream each week I can stimulate people into conversation. The art of rag chewing, of lengthy conversation on ham radio, seems to be a dying art. So this is an attempt to push it along a bit with a regular weekly session. It's about to turn 9:30, and at 9:30, as always, just checking the stream, it seems to be going okay. I shall hit the transmit button and we'll go on 147.475 megahertz NBFM, which covers the Melbourne area out to about 100 kilometres. And it is 9:30. Hello, this is VK3 Alpha Mike Lima with the regular Saturday night session, started by Tony Sanderson VK3AML in the early 70s, continued by Dave VK3ASE into the 80s, 90s, and the first couple of decades of this century. And for the last 18 months odd, it seems to have fallen to me to try to fill the shoes to some extent. This is VK3 Alpha Mike Lima with a test transmission on 147.475 megs, just checking. Everything's drawing the right current and producing the right number of watts up the stick, which is good. So, first of all, a great thank you to the number of people who sent complimentary wishes regarding last week's Saturday night session, which was on French Island, Melbourne's nearest wilderness area. And I read out some diary entries at length, which I thought might be a bit wanky or a little bit too much for attention spans to bear, but I must have been wrong, because that session, the whole 3 hours of it, has had 400 hits so far, and I see the average length of watching is about a half an hour. And that really surprises me in this day and age of glib one-liners being used, the media grab. Obviously there is some interest in more discursive contacts. We're moving into the silly season, Christmas, and I won't be on next Saturday. I will be the Saturday after, mainly because of Christmas obligations. My wife and I have having friends over next week, so no transmission will be possible, and I've not yet worked out a replay of recordings. Not that I particularly am interested in filling the spot every week. I do have a social life. However, just as a matter of interest, I went to the local $2 shop a few days ago, and I took a video because I could not believe the iconography that goes on these days with Christmas. Some of it, like Santa and the sleigh and everything, is quite understandable, but there's some really whacked out stuff in the way of Christmas ornamentation that's out there. and my local $2 shop seemed to go in for it in a big way. So I took a video. And here it is. This is my local $2 shop, the local mall, and quite a pretty display. We've got the usual crib, we've got elves in rotating cups, we've got snow domes galore. Now, there is one that really has me amazed. It's this one. It's a snow dome consisting of a telephone box, and if the scale is right, the Santa that's in it, with one of his little elf helpers, is standing in snow that is only falling in the telephone box. In the telephone box he also has a Christmas tree, and because the scale of the telephone box doesn't match the scale of the Santa, if you scaled up the telephone box to be normal size, Santa would be about 7 inches tall, about 15 centimetres. So, you know, and they're opening presents, which in something brown, which I take to be a sack, but actually looks like they're sitting on a bit of a turd. You wonder how far this iconography is going to go. I'll just keep the video going.
Oh, it's not a snowstorm.
Some quite pretty little Ferris wheels, a Christmas Ferris wheel. I wonder what sort of relation to Christmas that's supposed to have. And you've got your extremely dumb-looking reindeer, and Santa in some sort of a lamp box with snow falling. Now, what I want you to remember is that this store is in Australia. This is summer here. It's 100 degrees outside, or at least in the old measure it is. In the new measure it's about 40 degrees, although not this week. And all this is snow falling and us trying to convince ourselves that we're somewhere around Lapland or Norway. This really is whacked out stuff when you analyse it. And we've got our Christmas tree with a train in it. I'll just turn down that audio because you never know what sort of music restrictions we're jumping the bounds of. All very pretty, but nothing to do with Christmas whatever. The snow dome with the telephone booth, that just gets me. I mean, you know, what was the creator of this smoking at the time? It really makes you wonder. Christmas. What are we going to have next? Are we going to have Santa nailed to the cross as a confused piece of iconography, or Jesus climbing down folks' chimneys to deliver presents on Christmas Eve, or maybe even pictures of the Last Supper with Jesus saying ho, ho, ho to the disciples? I really despair over some of this Christmas junk. It's pretty, but if I was giving it to a child, for example, I'd worry that, how can I put this? My mother used to have a saying that the play is not in the child, the play is in the toy. If you give a child something like a Meccano set or Lego, the play, the creative action is in the child. If you give them a mechanised device like that, it might have enchantment for about 10 seconds, but that's where a child's interest in it would end. So I wonder if other people feel the same way about Christmas iconography. I'll just check my stream to see that all's going well. It seems to be going well this week. No interruptions as last week, which is great. Santa would not be able to reach button A or button B. Thank you, John Young. You're quite true. In fact, there wasn't a phone in the phone booth, which made the whole thing rather cracked. Another thing that we tend to see at Christmas time are, dare I say it, drunks. And I've seen one already. My wife and I were at a restaurant having dinner, and across the road this guy staggered into view. His bottom was out of his pants, and he was wearing a ripped t-shirt through which he had been sunburnt, as you will shortly see. He was obviously off his face on something, I can only assume drink at this time of the year, and he was trying to kick a Coke bottle into a dustbin without using his hands. Now, if he did it once or twice, that'd be fine. This guy kept it up for 35 minutes. He was the floor show for our dinner. And in the end, I couldn't resist pulling out the camera and shooting a few seconds worth of the routine. I'll just show you a bit of it. Here we go. He's getting it in. He's getting... No, it's not going in. So he gets it again. Notice that his toes are out of his runners as well. He's like gripping the bottle with his toes against the rubber sole, and he pushes it up the side of the bin. Will he get it? Will he get it? Will he get it? He's staggering backwards. Will he get it? He chucks it. No, this went on. This went on for half an hour, and I just wonder how much of this sort of thing I'm going to see by the time Christmas finishes. Pushing it up again. Will he get it in the bin? Will he get it in the bin? No! He fumbles it. So we had that for the better part of 35, maybe 40 minutes. And finally, I just noticed out of the corner of my eye while eating dinner with Prue, he got it in. And he sort of took 3 steps backwards and stared at the bin, not believing that he did it. There was complete look of amazement on his face. He went completely still, except for the occasional sway. Then he staggered off. It's the last we saw of him, but people are doing really weird shit at the moment. This is VK3AML with a regular Saturday night transmission. Some weeks ago, those of you who've been listening in for the last several weeks will know that we installed a new modem. And I have a bit of a video of unboxing that device here. I just wonder how many people have had experience of this particular sort of Optus modem, because it certainly got us out of our problems, and Optus supplied it free of charge in response to our complaints about our very defective internet service. So here's a bit of that. So we open the package it comes in, and it came fairly promptly, I must say. Very nicely packed in a little box. I examined all the paperwork to see that everything was in order. It was. And then we had the job of battling our way into the box with a box cutter. Take care of your fingers, mate. Yes, I passed the IQ test and managed to open the box. And the modem was larger than I expected. Presumably it contains a lot of gear and a lot more ventilation space than the previous modem, which suggests to me either the previous modem was underpowered or underventilated. Cables came with it. We were advised to change the cables to these. Power supply, key card to set the password. There's the modem. Squarish thing, and the Ethernet cables are in a rather inconvenient position underneath, but I guess that's done to allow ventilation holes and such. So there was our modem. That's the one that you're seeing me through at the moment if you're actually watching, and those listening on ham radio if you want to see the video that goes with this transmission, and there will be a point in it tonight particularly, as I'll be taking people on a tour of the Museum of Transport and Technology in Auckland, one of New Zealand's best science museums, and incidentally I think a lot better than any science museum I have seen in Australia. Bit of explanation here. I worked a couple of years in the 80s as Assistant Curator of Electronics at the Museum of Victoria, and what I saw going on with the museum then was a progressive trend away from dealing with the history of technology to make it more aligned with a humanities student's view of the world. In other words, how things worked was no longer the point of the exhibitions. It was more functionality and where they fit into society. However, in Auckland, I think the museum, because of its large volunteer base, has to be a lot more responsive to community demand. And there I saw a technological museum working as I think it should work. God, if I was younger, I'd be tempted to emigrate to New Zealand on this basis. But we'll take you to the Museum of Transport and Technology in Auckland, which Mike Groth, VK3AML, and I visited in 2017. So this is a few years old, but this indicates the sort of things that go on over there, and it's coverage mostly shot by Mike in video and by me for stills, though we did both shoot video there, that really reveals, I think, what a science museum today should be. So I'll just open that up, and here we go. The Museum of Transport and Technology, Auckland, New Zealand, 17th of January 2017. We spent the whole day there. Motat is, as they call it, is to the southwest of Auckland City. We got out there, I think, by bus, and it's built next to a spring that was the original water supply for Auckland. It's in two campuses. The bottom right there is the main campus, and there's an aviation museum connected with a tram line running between the two, which you see marked there in red. You can actually take a Melbourne tram there. Okay, this is flying into Auckland at about 4 a.m. I'm going to do a bit of drubbing here because we really had a bad deal from Jetstar. Note that, Jetstar. At the last minute, within 48 hours of going to Auckland, they rescheduled our plane. So instead of taking off in the afternoon and arriving late at night in Auckland, they took off at midnight our time and arrived in Auckland at 4 o'clock in the morning. Now, can you imagine trying to get to your hotel under those circumstances? Anyway, these were our first views of Auckland coming in at 4 a.m. in the twilight during summer. And as many of you may know, Auckland is built around 4 or 5 harbours, all coming in from different directions, some from the Tasman Sea, some from the Pacific Ocean. It's on a sort of a peninsula. Looks a bit like, the North Island looks a bit like the shoe of Italy stuck upside down, it always struck me. And so we come into Auckland at an ungodly hour of the morning on, I think, the 15th of January 2017. And my camera of those days was just capable of working at these low light levels, though not terribly well. Quick shot of inside. There's my wife Prue and Mike, VK3AML, sitting next to me. Slowing down to a halt, and this was, for me, I must admit that at the age of 62, this was my first trip to New Zealand, to my eternal regret. Had I been there 20 years earlier, I might have stayed much longer. Auckland Airport. Our first view of New Zealand, and there's Mike and Prue, my wife. Having collected their bags, we were arranging with a car hire company to get around New Zealand. Now, up in the ceiling, that plane belonged to Jean Batten. It's one of the planes that she used to set a record of flying between England and New Zealand in 1936 in 11 days. It took 40 years for that record to be exceeded, so she was quite a girl. Jean Batten, pioneer aviator, and her plane hangs to this day in the reception area of the Auckland Airport. Rather like Kingsford Smith's plane at the Southern Cross in Brisbane Airport, just outside Brisbane Airport. So, a couple of days later, we were at the entrance to the Museum of Transport and Technology, their main campus, the science campus. Looking over the fence there, we could see that part of it was set up as a village along the lines of Sovereign Hill, a pioneer village reconstruction. Not so ersatz. A lot of these buildings have actually been moved from their original location rather than constructed as stage sets. It's me distantly on the left there going into the entrance, and Mike trying to do a commentary over the very severe wind. They have a collection of trams, including Melbourne trams, surprisingly, which absolutely floored me. And you'll notice that the tracks they've got there are dual gauge. They actually have a different gauge in, I think, Auckland to Melbourne. So to run both bits of rolling stock, they have the dual gauge tracks. But the last thing you expect in Auckland is to see a local green toast rack tram. Mike shooting a few feet of video of it. So we make our way to the entrance of the Museum of Transport and Technology. That tram we'll travel on a little bit later in the day. Very nominal fee to get in, and of course the exchange rate from Melbourne is very favourable. I was photographing anything and everything, as you can see. So was Mike. So between the two of us, we assembled a fairly comprehensive coverage of all this. Okay, first visit, needless to say, is the building on the left there, which was their communications history building. That's the pump building, the oldest building on the site, 1877. And I'll say more about that a bit later. But you can see that there are various themed buildings in this, one on Antarctic. New Zealand in the digital world. This is the first of the galleries we'll visit. And you'll see all sorts of communications equipment here. Solar cells, transistor, the valve. And up there, just to the right of that miniature valve, is a deforest Audion, the very first type of commercial triode, First World War vintage, grid, filament and plate, very primitively arranged. That's a Philips radio of 1930. Some of their telegraph gear, a Wheatstone telegraph of the 1870s, I think. And they have a display about the Titanic and the equipment used on it, and in fact have a duplicate of original equipment, of course, of the equipment that was used on the Titanic to receive the signals from the Carpathia and other ships. This is it, a Marconi magnetic detector. Two reels either end have a piece of iron wire around them. That iron wire moves past some magnets and goes through a coil that's connected to aerial and earth, And what it does is that whenever there's an RF signal present, it demagnetises the ion moving into it, devised by Lord Rutherford, who you see here in his younger days, 1895, and commercialised by the Marconi company. And it worked as the magnetism decayed, it produced sound in the headphones. And this is the companion tuner that was used with that detector, a Marconi triple tuner, and they had one of those too. It could be wired in 4 different ways for wavelengths ranging from 80 metres to 2,600 metres, or roughly 110 kilohertz to 3 megs. And there it is. That's probably 1910 or thereabouts. That's the aerial tuning inductance in microhenries. And you'll notice the tuner switch is rated in wavelength in metres as well as feet. That would be considered rather eccentric these days. There was a version of that with a built-in tuner, but it was only designed to pick up time signals from Paris. This is a demonstration of the magnetic detector from a very old YouTube clip I couldn't source properly, but you can see it can be used to demodulate AM signals quite well. Whenever the movement of the iron wire is stopped, it stops working, all driven by a clockwork motor.
Some of the equipment as it would have been used.
This is Mike's description.
There's the tuner, and in the background the magnetic detector, the Marconi magnetic detector, which was actually developed by the principal that was Ernest Rutherford back in 1895. And the Maggie came into 1902, and it was the standard radio detector for all Marconi stations for the next 10 years.
The first computers built in New Zealand, mechanical, 1935 vintage. There's a chart plotter made of Meccano, and over here the actual differential engine, also made of Meccano. Over here, Marconi triple tuner and magnetic detector, Marconi company. I think this is multiplex telegraphy, design of submarine cables, and there's a Wheatstone telegraph here. Then over here, the history of electronics from the first DeForest Bordian valve, which is there, moving through. Gramophone, phonograph, music box. A Philips radio of about 1930 vintage. Every form of communication is documented here. It's a most extraordinary collection, wide-ranging and well documented. Hughes optical lamp. And as you can hear, lots of kids are attracted to it. 3D slide cam. A 3D slide viewer.
Lots of interesting things happening here. I still know it's
TV. Mama TV.
Lots of bits and pieces, old teletypes and teleprinters.
TV.
Old television sets.
And then there was a second telecommunications building with a lot of the equipment that they were actually restoring at the time.
An old Creed teleprinter.
Sounder.
The old mechanical Bordeaux code.
And please note, this equipment was not just on display, it was working.
All of the stuff that about to restore. We're in the telecommunication section. Lots and lots and lots of stuff. A bit hard to film, it's fairly small space. Radio, the death hour has come. The radio's arrived in only a matter of hours before Australia goes insane.
As you can see, they don't believe in storing the stuff away. Most of the stuff is on display. So I went nuts with the camera, as you can see. Telephone, including a uni-selector display working, which is there under glass. Manual telephone exchange on the right, and every piece of service gear, plus volunteers to explain this gear to you. In my humble opinion, this is what a science museum should be. We don't see this very much in Australia. Another view of the telephony section. Every type of telephone from Graham Bell onwards there. Telegraphy and printing telegraphy, Creed teleprinter, and a collection of valves that's second to none. There were also video displays associated with this so that you could see the original equipment working as it had worked back in the 20s, 30s or whatever. A description of an L.M. Ericsson rotary automatic telephone system, and then a collection of radios, including some that had gone to the Antarctic, a 1920 vintage crystal set, a 1925 vintage Grebe synchrophase, a loose coupler crystal set, a Marconi crystal set, 1922. I wasn't aware that they'd actually made them. An S.G. Brown amplifier to feed horn loudspeakers, an Edison Swan 1925, a direct printing early teleprinter, not a Morse printer, please note, and many of you will have seen some of these valves. Intercom systems for offices, going back to the turn of this last century. Morse printing telegraphs prior to the turn of last century, and these are heliograph mirrors. And so the collection goes on and on and on. It was real sensory overload for anybody with an interest in the history of telecommunications. Then we get on to computers, ranging from the mechanical abacus to a machine built in Cambridge University in 1935, largely made out of Meccano. This is a mechanical analog computer known as a differential amplifier.
1935, do you reckon, was it? This is a 1935 differential engine, an analog computer, basically built out of Meccano by Harry Whale, I believe.
And we got a few shots of this. I hoped to be able to understand it, but the mechanism quite quite overwhelmed me, particularly as you think, if you look at this, you don't realise it's 8 feet long.
A computer built out of Marconi, and it had graphs and stepping motors. I don't quite know how it worked, but it must have done something.
And Mike's a doctorate, so if he can't understand it, I don't have a hope. But very impressive early work. Mechanical analogues of computers, ranging through to early computers of the mainframe type. New Zealand has always punched above its weight scientifically, and this particular guy was involved with launching a New Zealand satellite. He comes from
This
Invercargill.
fellow became the first privately operated to send a rocket into space, typical of the Kiwis.
And there were Hughes lanterns, optical lanterns, slide projector basically, through to the most modern films in digital form. A 3D picture viewer from the 60s. And every type of telephone you could possibly think of. New Zealand wired in the digital world, another display. Mike had his photograph taken by this device and it projected him up onto this cylindrical screen. And then that becomes part of that multi-picture. Very clever digital display. Mike's picture goes up and joins hundreds of others. I can't even explain that over radio, you would have to see this. Now the machinarium, an area where the operation of machines and their components is explained.
We're in the machinarium. Very it really is. It's not like the Smithsonian, but gee, they've done a great.
And things that kids can turn and manipulate and see. This used to be the staple of the old Museum of Applied Arts and Sciences in Swanton Street, but no longer fashionable. But who cares? It's being done in New Zealand much more effectively. My wife Prue having a look, and if she's interested in it, she's not a committed person to museum displays, so I was impressed by how she responded to it. The mechanical engineers of the future, perhaps. It was hard to know where to turn to look at the next impressive artefact. This was one that took my fancy.
These are live. I reckon they're powering the
Mercury
tram
arc
outside.
rectifiers, 3-phase.
And I'll just come in close, and you can see the old Mercury, and if you look carefully, you can see the arc floating around on the pool of Mercury. In there, if I zoom in, you can see the arc floating around on the pool of Mercury in there. And I think it works on the principle that the electrons travel much faster than the mercury ions. So the current will flow much easier in one direction than the other.
This is a DC power rectifier
Yeah, they'd be
for
running
the
on
trams that are at the Museum of Transport and Technology. And as you can see, as the tram speeds up, the amount of discharge in these mercury vapour devices increases.
These are live. I reckon they're powering the tram outside. I'll just come in close.
Further over in the machine, a tidal gauge, which you see there, triumph of mechanical engineering from the 19th century. And then
into the pump house, we've just finished the machineorium. There's the steam tractor out there.
this is the device around which Motat was originally built. It was a pump, a beam engine from 1877 that supplied Auckland's water supply from 1877 to 1928. It was then decommissioned but left there unused until about 2011, and then they got it going again. That's the beam of the beam engine, steam.
The massive flywheel. And two pistons. There's the piston there and the valve chest there, and it's all lined with timber for insulation. It really is an amazing... Yeah, I'll get that. Well, the beam engine there. And I might even see if I can stop it.
This is a beam engine used for pumping Auckland's first water supply, 1877, and the whole engine, including the beam, which is up there, is still in situ. I probably should. There's two of the cylinders on the right, and right through there are two of the cylinders on the left. You can just see them through there.
Actually, they're not two cylinders. One's a valve chest and one's a...
And this is a description of that beam engine. Weighs 16 tonnes, with a flywheel 20 feet in diameter. There have been whole books written on this installation.
That's... there's the two cylinders. There's the valve chest and the cylinders, and the 290 degrees out of phase, and a massive flywheel. Probably, I think it ran for about 50 years, pumped the Auckland water supply. I'm in behind the tea rooms at Motat, and we kept hearing a steam whistle that looks like a ship. And this is apparently the lake. This was Auckland's water supply. And the place is built around the old pumping station, which we visited earlier. But here's the lake. It apparently was a spring in about 1874. The water supply in the middle of Auckland, and was never enough. So they purchased there was a mill here and a spring, and they purchased this as the water supply, and built the pump house. In the main gym there's an old-fashioned stationary engine working, and the boiler up there. I suspect the beam engine probably works occasionally. And there's an old compound engine up ahead. And there's a triple double expansion. I don't know what that one is.
Devonport Tangi steam pump from the 1890s. A lot of this steam gear is working as well.
Steam engine, the high pressure cylinder, the low pressure cylinder, and that's the three pistons for pumping water. If I turn the record on. There's the boiler, there's a triple expansion steam engine. I reckon she was out of a ship somewhere, together with the mechanic.
This steam engine was originally in the Sydney Harbour Ferry Grey Cliff in 1910, then sank. The actual ship sank after collision with Tahiti, and then it was transferred to New Zealand after the accident and after being recovered off the bottom of Sydney Harbour. Salvaged in 1928. In 1938 it crossed the Tasman and was used in a dairy. Arrived at Motat in 1968 and was restored and is now operating every day. a very impressive piece of equipment. It reminded me of that film Metropolis, that silent film. Massive device. And this is in the original engine room of the pumping station from 1877.
What's that?
Lots of children looking on. They encourage kids to come in here. It is really well run. That chap who's in charge of the steam boilers is a trained chap, but working as a volunteer, as many people are in this site of Auckland at Motat, the Museum of Transport and Technology. And again, if you want to look in on this, do put the phrase VK3AML 20 November 2021 into Google search. You'll find the YouTube live stream of this. If you're a steam buff, this will be right up your alley. Again, VK3AML 20 November 2021 will bring you the YouTube live stream of what we're actually looking at ourselves. A tour of the Museum of Transport and Technology at Auckland, New Zealand in 2017 by Mike Groth and myself, VK7NJ and VK3AML. Mike talking to the boiler operator. The number of exhibits here is quite spectacular. Donkey engines of various types, more high-tech ones. And a diagram of how a really large boiler actually works. Moving on to the Antarctic display within the Museum of Transport and Technology. It commemorates the Antarctic Expedition of 1956-8, led by Sir Edmund Hillary, who drove this specially adapted Ferguson tractor to the South Pole. Unbelievable. He drove a Ferguson tractor to the South Pole. Sir Edmund Hillary. This is after his ascent of Everest, which I think was 1952. Also did a lot of important scientific measuring work down in the Antarctic. And that's well documented in this display. Interviews and videos are running continuously. There are volunteers on hand to answer your questions. There's tremendous amount of documentation you can read on the walls. This, again, I have to keep on emphasising, it's an exemplary display, and I can only suggest that people who go to New Zealand put the Museum of Transport and Technology on your list of must-sees.
And I think his comment was, they can't, what are they going to do? Sack me. I'm famous already. They're not going to sack me.
And there's an overall picture of the display, the Antarctic display, how they lived, sleeping conditions, the sort of documentation they had to take down there, and a map of the path used by Hillary to actually traverse the Antarctic continent. But now it was time to move on, and we could take a tram, a Melbourne tram, to the second campus of the Museum of Transport and Technology, Motat.
1907
There was, before we left, we had a look at a display of motorised fire engines. This is the second oldest fire engine anywhere, motorised fire engine.
From about 1895, a horse-drawn one in York. Solid rubber tyres. I don't know whether it was engine, petrol or steam.
Fairly simple controls.
Merryweather, London, Metropolitan Fire Brigade. The pump on the back. So I reckon that's a boiler under the front, and that's, I don't know what vintage that is. I reckon that'd be 1950s.
What models of fire
Holden
engines?
Special FB, 1960. Yep, that'd be about right. Compete with a flashing red light and the spotlights on the top.
And this gives you some idea of part of the historical street, which has been used as a background, a framework to display appropriate material.
An old Douglas.
Motorbikes.
Brother will be interested in this. I don't know what that machine is. It's got some. Oh, a J. A J.
JAP.
A Douglas. A Triumph. Probably about a 350, I'd say, maybe a 450. And I'm not sure what that last one is. I've got too much reflection on the right. There we are. That's the Motat village. That's apparently where we're heading. And this was the building that...
That's the little village that's
caught it
like a miniature version of Sovereign Hill. How people lived in early New Zealand.
Stuffing up the button. There we are. There's... So they build shingle roofs, timber construction.
Shingle roof. And the interiors are furnished appropriately to the period, which is, I think, 1870s.
So much in a small space. Looking out onto the main road. Very traditional New Zealand house. It reminds me of the construction of the old house we had at Portobello. The planks, and I think they used to cover it with hessian and newspaper. That's some of the photographs. That's the bedroom. As best I can, because there's glass, you can't get in them, the doors have...
And we were shooting through glass, of course, but you can see the appropriate 1890s or 1870s, I think, furnishings that have been provided impeccably in each of these little display houses to show people how early New Zealanders lived.
Sort of what's basically meant to be the village square. Yeah, one of the sort of Victorian wooden houses. Or Victorian era, because we're not in Victoria, of course. Either Victoria, Canada, or Victoria, Australia.
Now tractors.
Workhorses that don't eat the crops, it said. And tractors.
And at this stage we looked into the Tramway Museum and some of the shops in the road. There was a gramophone shop set up as it would have been in the 20s, the 1920s that is. Then we broke for lunch, as you see there. Quite a nice lunch too. This is honestly the last thing I ever expected to see in this part of the world, an East Brighton tram. Although I don't think number 64 went to East Brighton back in Melbourne. I probably travelled on this very one. There's the smoking compartment, as there used to be. Oh my God, Taronga Road. And this is in Auckland. Let's go in a bit closer on that. You never know what you're going to see in Auckland.
That's an Auckland tram. Eat your heart out. A real Bondi tram. in Auckland, New Zealand, in the Tram Museum.
Certainly shot through.
It's a genuine Bondi tram, and that one there is actually a Wellington tram. It's narrow gauge.
And they all still work.
Goes to the airport. Apparently that's why they've got the dual gauge tracks here. They're still running some old Wellington trams.
Off goes the Melbourne tram for the other campus of Motat. And that was where we were headed. We were at the bottom right there at the Motat main campus, and then we took that red line tramway to the Sir Keith Park Memorial Aviation Collection.
Which will leave in a couple of minutes, about 10 minutes, to the Aircraft Museum.
There's me doing a bit of shooting of Mike. And there's Mike 7MJ doing a bit of shooting of me. And that tram is not going to Malvern Town Hall unless they extend the track another 3,000 kilometres. Notice that the track is in pre-war red and yellow livery.
No, I don't mind. I'll take a while to get up. Okay. Yeah, just have a hip replacement.
Prue and myself getting on board. Older viewers will recognise one of these trams as typical of the rolling stock that was on the lines in the 60s in Melbourne, just about to be pensioned off.
Oh, that's all right.
And off we go. As I sat on this tram heading for the second Motat campus, I realised how different the sound of an old toast rack tram is to the ones that we have today with switching controls and such. This is all the old resistor type control. And so we go on a ride through the streets of Auckland on a Melbourne tram. Everybody was shooting video. We go north around the springs that are the basis of the old pumping station, and we pass the Auckland Zoo on the way. We didn't stop there, unfortunately. I'll have to go back to Auckland and do some of the other cultural spots. Western Springs, that is, the springs that the Motats built at the side of. We're skirting the side of the park that's around Western Springs. Could almost be in the Domain in Melbourne here. Very familiar. Entrance to Auckland Zoo. Crew and myself having a bit of a good time. And crossing, I think, the main North Road. I have to give the bell here.
Are we here?
There goes that familiar bell from my childhood. The sound of a Melbourne tram. This particular tram was built in 1925, I found out. Very strange feeling to be on a Melbourne tram in Auckland. Something I never expected to do, actually. One of the Auckland Performing Arts Centres. Just coming into the Aviation collection of the Motat Museum. That's a Performing Arts Centre on the right. This is part of a cultural precinct.
I bet you they haven't got controls back. Here's an original aircraft after I think he smashed that one when he crashed.
Oh, did he?
Yeah, Edward Pearce, wasn't it? The fellow down in
It's all in there.
Yeah.
This is the Aviation Museum section of Motat. Quite a large collection of aircraft, with a very prominent one, a Spitfire, just out here. Directions, the direction sign to the various collections. At Tiger Moth up there is the plane on which my father unsuccessfully learned flying in 1941. They scrubbed him from that service and made him a weatherman for the RAAF. It's typical of what happened to school teachers who got into the RAAF. Probably was a more appropriate task for my father anyway. And this is the main exhibition hall. It is enormous, as you'll see in a moment. I think that's a B-52. This is a combination of footage that was shot by Mike and by me. And unfortunately our two cameras are working on different frame rates, so you have to sacrifice the fluidity of motion for one or the other. This is a sectioned jet turbine, to show people exactly how a jet engine works.
Go near it.
An Allison turbine. Military aircraft and engines. Covering a full range from the First World War through to the present. This collection is up there with the Moorabbin Aviation Museum or the RAAF Museum as one of the best in New Zealand.
16th inch plywood. Lightly armoured, but very fast.
A plywood bomber. This is the Mosquito. And they have a Catalina in there. You don't realise how big they are until you see them. Designed for carrying troops during the Second World War.
Yeah.
They actually had to take the tail off to
Just
get it into the
amazing.
building.
I've never ever seen a flying boat in real life before. Oh, this is just incredible. Just an incredible number of aircraft. Really is an amazing place. You could spend all day just in here if you're an aircraft buff.
We're away.
Here we are. That, I don't know what that one is. And there's a Mosquito bomber there in the background. That's a Hawker de Havilland something or other, Royal New Zealand Air Force.
And they were restoring, as you can hear in the background.
Under the wing of the flying gate, there's a little old auto gyrocopter.
And there are more hanging from the ceiling. Light aircraft of different types. That's a New Zealand-made thing, that thing on the left. You'll hear a bit more about that later. And that in front of us there, closest plane, is a flying flea, as it was called. They were an ultralight that was fatal for many of the people who flew it.
Crop dusting in that, apparently. Short wings, stubby, just the ideal sort of thing for crop dusting. Flying around strange places in New Zealand in the mountains. The sort of aircraft that used for that sort of work. Mokai, I don't know what
I think
that
that's
is.
a Dragon
That's the name of
Rapide.
the aircraft or a company that made them.
Immediate
There's just so
pre-war.
much stuff up here. Just amazing.
plane from the 20s up the top there.
The Flying Flea. Looks a bit like one too. The old Hawker, the old Dakota, DC-3 Dakota. Yeah, first plane I ever flew in. From Cairns to Townsville back in early 1958. Just another quick view of the everything.
The main exhibition hall had so many planes in it, it was difficult to know where to start and where to finish. De Havilland planes all over on one side. This is VK3AML with the regular Saturday night test transmission, and if you want to look in on the video component of this, Google VK3AML 20 November 2021 and that should find our live stream. And today we're doing a tour of the Museum of Transport and Technology in Auckland. Video shot by Mike Groth VK7MJ and myself in 2017 when we went over there with Prue. You could probably work out what all these planes are from the registration markings on them. You could get the date of their first registration in each case. I'm literally doing a walkthrough here. On the balcony on the left, all of the accessories used for aviation were placed. Gauges, altimeters, communications equipment, you name it, all there. Closer look at the Flying Flea. It was a biplane, but one wing behind the other instead of on top of the other. And I imagine that caused a bit of aerodynamic interference, which probably contributed to the instability of this particular type of ultralight craft. 1930s Flying Flea, the start of the ultralight movement. Displays of sectioned engines, including the Gnome rotary, where the engine rotated along, or the engine head, the head blocks rotated along with the propeller. That's an Avro, light aircraft, low wing monoplane. There's Mike with his video camera at the ready. And that Dragon Rapide again. The Dragon Rapide Mokai, a Royal Mail plane. Some of the earlier aircraft hanging from the rafters.
1977, the RNZAF had one as a VIP aircraft, and in Taupo it rolled up and the Queen popped out and sat out the back of the place. There's obviously a flying boat being partly restored. Maybe it's an old Solent, I don't know. And around the back is apparently the railway section, but I don't think that's open.
We weren't there on a Sunday, so not all of this was open.
It's a Tuesday afternoon, so
I think we were there on a Tuesday. So unfortunately, all we could see were a few closed sheds of places we would have liked to have seen. Well, that gives us a good excuse to go back and have a look round. Like those sheds there. I think some of them are restoration sheds, so not open to the general public.
This really is an incredible place. The whole Motat is really a really good system. I think the Kiwis have set an example. It's going to be a bit of a challenge to follow. There we are, some of the suburbs of Auckland there. Kingford Smith. and that's apparently one of the air engines from the Southern Cross.
Ended in New Zealand.
And I gather that's an aero engine from a bloke in Invercargill who flew a plane in 1910, before Houdini flew the first aircraft in Australia in about the same year. Though there doesn't seem to be any bits left of Edward Pearce's aircraft flight in 1905.
The first in New Zealand, purportedly. A final look around. The Catalina. Several bombers. DC-3. Looking down on the flying flea there. Very strange wing arrangement on that thing. Back outside and heading back to Auckland on the tram. This is VK3AML.
From the Melbourne tram to head back to the other end of Auckland so that I can pick up the car, and we're heading over to Ponsonby.
And so we did. We went on our way and actually toured both islands on that trip. This is VK3 Alpha Mike Lima, both islands of New Zealand, that is. While I'm making up time to 11 o'clock to the live QSO portion of this show, I thought I'd just run a little bit of an AM group as received on a Utah SDR, and the quality of audio that's transmitted by these people via AM, they're still AM enthusiasts in America, on what they call the 75 metre band. Let's have a listen in on 3850, I think it is, kilohertz.
And I know there's high voltage in there, so if they change a bit, it could affect it quite a bit. So, but it's not dead on arrival. I mean, CRT looks like it's working really fine, and those tubes hopefully aren't weak, and will still do the job. So we'll give it a shot. But I think it'll look really good there with the Apache, and give me another thing to look at if I put it on the DX60 too. Oh, it was good talking to John DQE. I haven't talked to him in a while, and we talked. It was yesterday afternoon on sideband, but I'm real weak on sideband in the afternoons. But we were able to talk a little bit, him and Brent, and another hand, Bill, K7HLQ. I don't know if you've talked to him or not. He had an HT37 that sounded pretty good. And let's see, that's about it. That's no big plans today. My wife's going into town to do a little bit more of her politic in there with her Lemhi County economic development thing. Anyway, found out yesterday we got 37 cases of COVID in the last 2 weeks. So, and Idaho is starting to turn people away from their ICUs. So, getting bad here again. So we're all back in our spacesuit. Well, we've got masks and use a lot of hand sanitizer, and she keeps her distancing. So if you go into the grocery store, it'll be avoid everybody and go through the self-check line. 87CJ and it's 7H.
All right there. No, excuse me. All right there, Bob. Hold on. Get some coffee here. Sitting here scarfing down my breakfast burrito this morning. So it's awfully good. And at least I got good company with the munching away on breakfast. Let's see, November Sierra 7 Hotel. This is AE7CJ. Yeah, I was reading in the news that your governor over there has called in the feds for assistance there. Let's see, got, besides the National Guard, he called in some portable healthcare professionals to help with the ER situation there in the state. So
This is VK3 Alpha Mike Lima with a test transmission, the regular test transmission. At the moment I'm just relaying an AM net as received on an American WebSDR whose waterfall display you can see on the screen at the moment on I think it was 3885 kilohertz actually. And thank you to Jeff for the correction on the bomber. It's a Lancaster. Yes, embarrassment. Oh well. We have to forge on. This is the narration, by the way, in terms of my narration, is all being done live off the cuff as far as I can. And it's a good 4 years since we were at the Motat, so I did a lot of it from memory. Back to the recording of the American AM net. AM still has a big following in America, as you'll hear.
first aid station to see if they can put a couple of stitches in you because the hospital's way too busy. So, yeah, I got the same situation over here. But I've been watching the COVID case count for my county here, which is usually way up there. Well, at least the case, the new cases are starting to drop, and hopefully that's because people are getting smarter and restricting their movements. Of course, summer is finally winding down, and the kids are basically headed back to school. And I'm sure we'll see caseloads for children get amplified here in the next couple of months. It's gonna be hard to watch that when it comes to kids, but what can you do there? So anyway, well, yeah, I went into the big city yesterday. I mailed off some tubes to Keith, KE7GPO, and also picked up the victuals for last night's barbecue, and the victuals for the rest of the week. So I don't plan to go back into town till probably the middle of next week again. So my old workmate will come up here tomorrow. We're going to do a hike, and so I can get my weekly exercise in. But I've been slacking off on taking my daily walks because I've been so busy outside. So I'm kind of keeping up on walking the correct amount of distance around the property here. So anyway, that's the news here. Yeah, things aren't getting better on the COVID count. Boy, I'm sure glad I got a vaccination. At least one line of defense there. This is nasty stuff that's out there. Sure enough. Anyway, back to you there, Bob. November Sierra 7012. This is AE7CJ.
K7 DQ. Good morning.
K7EMF. Good morning, gentlemen.
Good morning, everyone. Hold on, let me turn the local stuff down here. I stream the local Idaho Falls station in the morning to catch up on the weather. Let's see, who did I talk to? AE7CJ in the group now, and S7H. Well, good morning to Mike, and good morning to Gary. And, yeah, that's the thing that makes me upset about people that just are anti-vaccine anyway, is that they have a different attitude when it's them going into the ICU. But I look at the elected operations of some that aren't elected, and I got friends that are, that have been putting medical treatments off for a year because of COVID, and now they have to do it again. So anyway, yeah, it's sort of sad, and I'm sure they're trying to work on getting vaccine approved for kids. That would help too, because it's starting to pick up on them, and then more healthcare workers are dying. So I don't know what the situation there is too. They should be vaccinated. So anyway, we'll turn it over to Mike, and then Mike, you turn it over to Gary. So then Gary.
Well, that was an AMNet recorded off an American web SDR, the Northern Utah web SDR, which is an SDR that's been set up by the Utah Amateur Radio Group, including my friend KA7OEI, Clint Turner, who has a website, where he deals with the same experiments, the light communication, modulated light communication that I do. And their web SDR is out in the middle of nowhere in northern Utah, up near a famous place called Promontory Point, north of the Great Salt Lake, where the transcontinental rail line east and west was finally joined in 1869. But they took over apparently a monitoring station that was used during the Cold War, with excellent HF monitoring facilities, including a log periodic that can tune everything from 80 metres to 10, with considerable forward gain. And with that antenna inherited by the UARG and the very competently set up web SDR associated with it, if somebody transmits on flea power in Europe, that thing can hear an electronic pin drop on the other side of the Atlantic. It's just extraordinary. The Northern Utah Web SDR, do give it a go on Kiwi SDR. It's worth the try. This is VK3AML with a regular Saturday night test transmission. I'll run a quick and funny little video of a visit that Mike and I made to a well-known tourist spot called the Morat Boulders. This is only about 3 minutes worth of video, but at the end of this I'll be calling a QSO, a CQ, for anybody who'd like to chat. I know that we'll be, I think, one person down this week as a result of social obligations, which I expect will occupy many of us through the next few weeks into Christmas. But the Morat Boulders, we went there expecting to be more or less alone, watching these extraordinary, perfectly spherical boulders formed by an odd geological action in past geological times. These round boulders are set into the beach, and they look strange. They're like a giant has been playing marbles and just left them behind, so perfectly round. So it being just, I think, north of Dunedin by about 100 k's along the coast, the east coast of the South Island of New Zealand, we expected to be just about the only people there. How wrong we were. Let's have a look. The Morat Boulders, north of Dunedin, 6th of February 2019. This is our last visit. And looking one way down the beach, it looked pretty attractive, although we're a long way south. You're about the same latitude as Hobart here, so you wouldn't want to swim in that water, even in summer. But 2 buses rolled up at the kiosk above the Morat Boulders, and we ended up battling our way through crowds down onto the beach. There's a rather bewildered looking Mike going ahead of me. This is the beach that we expected nobody to be at. And there are the boulders, some of the boulders out in the water there. They're not only round, but they're in 2 distinct sizes. I think the 2 metre size and the 1 metre size, and there's no intermediate. They seem to form in distinct sizes, and many of them are hollow. They're really odd. They're a concretion, an aggregation of chemical components as a result of geological action through the ages. That's looking south towards Morat itself. And this is the crowd to the north. We couldn't believe it. Just between you and I, Mike thought we'd walked into an advertisement made by One Nation for electing the red-haired terror. And the parents were putting their kids on top of these boulders, presumably trying to kill them and get rid of them with big waves, but the waves weren't quite big enough, were they? So the kids came back. So much for a solitary experience in the wilds of New Zealand. This was not the place to do it. Either that or we picked a very wrong time. Bastards everywhere. It was like St Kilda Beach on a sunny day. So we made our departure, saying a fond farewell to the Morat boulders in the South Island of New Zealand. This is VK3 Alpha Mike Lima, just filling in time until we can open things up for comms. I suppose it's 10:54, which is close enough to time. I'll just change the position of my headphones so I can monitor off 2 meters. Just stand by. And now we're monitoring 2 meters. So I guess I can call CQ on 147.475 and hope somebody will be coming back to me there. So this is VK3AML. Checking that the transmitter's still working, calling CQ and standing by.
Yeah, VK3ACZ.
And VK3 Echo Charlie Golf.
Oh, I didn't expect both of you to be there. I think one of you said that you weren't going to be here tonight. So very pleased that you can both still turn up. So Peter, 3ACZ, and Dave, 3ECG. I hope that video was up to the usual standard. It was shot not with a Sony camera as I normally do, but I used to have this as my standard camera, a Panasonic Lumix TZ80, and I was never terribly happy with it. It eventually failed when the automatic handshake correction went west, and even if you put this on a tripod, the image would do little circles as the image stabilization had gone crook. And I was told that the fixing of that would cost as much as the camera, so it never got fixed. I keep it as a keepsake, but these days I've standardized nearly all of my gear on the Sony product. It's only 10 times optical zoom through Sony, but the video quality is impeccable. It will do 4K. The old Panasonic Lumix would do 4K only nominally. It would almost do a 4K picture if the sun was out and it was really bright, but take it into an indoor environment and it looked like it was shooting standard def. And that was the situation I had in some of those aviation halls trying to shoot video with this. It really fuzzed it out. So, how have you been, Peter? And are you putting up with all of the wet weather we've been having, the unseasonal wet weather and the wind? VK3ACZ and group, with a pause in case anybody else would like to drop in. VK3AML.
VK3 Golf Lima Charlie.
Acknowledging GLC, we'll take Peter first.
Yeah, VK3AML in the group from VK3ACZ. Good evening, Chris. Good evening, Dave. And mental blank sets in GLC. Can't remember the name. It'll come to me. You were coming through quite well also. I don't know where to start tonight. First of all, your unboxing video of a new modem. You've been watching too much YouTube. Everybody seems to be doing that nowadays. But yes, over to Auckland we went first. Commendations to you for having the courage to fly Jetstar. Hi. One thing I liked about Auckland Airport itself is that they've got a lounge where you can sit and watch the planes taking off and landing. I wish we still had something like that, an observation deck at Tullamarine. We did have a while back where you went outside, but that's been closed off for a long time now. And the next thing that comes to mind, the East Brighton Tram. Who would have thought? And I just loved hearing the sound of the compressor there. When it cuts in with the clunk, when the governor cuts in, and you get the pumping up the brake pipe to 500 kilopascals or whatever it is on a tram. Marvellous sounds. And, the planes. The Mosquito and the Lancaster. Yes, I don't need to point out that was a Lancaster. I went to see G for George at the Canberra War Memorial, and it wasn't actually there at the time. It had been sent away for refitting or some such thing. But I didn't waste my trip there. I went in the basement around the back there where you could sit at the computers and look up records and photos and all that. And there was a big sign there saying only 20 minutes per person. But as I was the only person in there that day, about 2.5 hours later, I resurfaced. But anyway, that's another story. And listening to the 80-metre stateside stations, yes, I've been hearing a few of them, and it's taken a whole year for me to finally work an American station on 80 metres, mainly because they do sit above 3,800. More's the pity. How annoying. And one last thing, for Dave especially, my Crawford's production DVDs of The Coroner arrived, and I've been smiled each time I see the credits roll through and I see your name there in the thanks bit there. I'm 2/3 the way through Series 1. That's the only one they've released. I think you did say, Dave, that you'd been that your dial actually got filmed for part of it. I've been looking out for you, and I haven't seen you yet. Anyway, that is Season 1, and I'll just say quickly, oh dear, I think they were let down a bit with poor acting, poor scripting, and all the rest of it. It's a bit of a pedestrian dawdle, I do find, but I guess the homicides and Division 4s and Matlocks and all that, you were really seeing a bit of Melbourne's history. It's mainly inside a courtroom, as you would know, so the nostalgia's not quite there. But that's a pretty long first over. I better hand it back. Forgive me for waffling. A VK3AML in the group, VK3ACZ.
Yeah, VK3ACZ, VK3AML. I better hand it straight round to Dave. By the way, the Jetstar booking was a mistake. The people, we had a group of 6 that went round New Zealand on that trip. Myself, my wife Prue, Mike Groth, 7MJ, and 3 of my wife's nursing colleagues. And on the day that we went to Motat, that was a must for me and Mike, and Prue fell into line with that. But her 3 nursing colleagues took that day to go to the Bay of Islands in a bus tour north of Auckland. They weren't with us. But one of the members of that group had booked Jetstar, being a little bit green in terms of her knowledge of which service to book. And after experiencing them switching our flight from a convenient time to something arriving at 4 in the morning at Auckland within 48 hours of departure time was just unacceptable. We have never gone by Jetstar since, and this anti-commercial comes from VK3AML. VK3ECG. Better hand it round to you before I do myself any more damage. VK3AML.
Yes, VK3ECG. Well, fantastic. I loved the museum and the aircraft, particularly wonderful. Yes, I did spot the Sunderland rather than Catalina. The Sunderland doesn't have the big sort of bulbous sort of canopies on each side at the bottom, which Catalina had. I think my father recalled me stories of travelling in Catalinas and Sutherlands actually during the Second World War. He was involved in Transport Command at one stage, and they were moving aircraft around. I think that's his only involvement with them, but it's fascinating. And the Meraki boulders, I think I probably told you the story before, but when I went over a few years ago now, and we went up from Dunedin to Fleur's place for the fish restaurant, and then went to the Meraki boulders as well, and I persuaded my daughter, which I managed to get some decent photographs of, to imagine the boulder as a ball of dung, and she had to be the dung beetle moving it. So she was sort of doing a handstand with her feet against the side of the boulder as if to push it. It's amazing what you can get your kids to do, actually. Given that she was probably in her mid-20s at the time, and that seemed to go down quite well. I've got some very good photographs of that, but I did a spectacular fall over in the sea, tripping over one of the boulders that's really was just a slight dome above the sand. There's quite a lot of them that are actually beneath the sand, and spectacularly fell over my back in the sea there. So it's a somewhat muted memory of that beach, good and bad. but there we are. Yes, it's been an interesting week from that point of view. Glad you got to see the old state coroner videos. I think I just appear in the background in one of the episodes. So I think towards the end, I'm not sure now. I think it must be one of the later ones, because I was there on set helping. I know. Explaining how to use some bit of equipment or something like that, and the director said, "Do you want to go on? Do you want to be an extra?" And so they chucked me into a scene as a lawyer talking to a group of other lawyers, just at the back of the courtroom, and that was about it. While something else was going on, and that's about my only appearance in it. But there we are. But yeah, it's been one of those strange weeks for me for media, because I've had lots of people. Contacting me about commenting on interstate things, in particular of things going on with the William Tyrrell business in New South Wales. So I've done a couple of interviews and for radio and did breakfast TV for Channel 9 actually. So that was interesting, but all very general and background, because I don't know exactly what's going on, and I don't want to know at this point. So it's they always try and get someone from interstate to comment, because they don't have because they won't get anything out of the people who are doing it. And it's exactly the same happens the other way around when it's something in Victoria. So we sort of just do it really to get everyone aware of what's going on. But I love the museum, fantastic video, and as I said, modem unboxing, yes. Well, that's an awful lot of unboxing videos, I must say. By and large, not yours was tedious, but a lot of the unboxing videos can be very tedious, especially watching somebody get out and painstakingly removing wrappings of boxes and things like that. Anyway, back to you, Chris, and good evening to you, Peter. From VK3 Echo Charlie Golf.
Yeah, no worries, Dave. I'll be very interested to find out, when you did the interview with Channel 9, did you do it via Skype? It seems to me that a lot of, particularly the breakfast programs, where people would have to come into a studio at an inconvenient time of the day to do the interview, that the TV stations are increasingly using Skype as a means of interviewing people both here and overseas. And the major fault that you see in most of these interviews is that the audio is typically from a laptop or a tablet, and the people who are being interviewed don't know to remove themselves from rooms with live walls. They sound, in some cases, like they're being interviewed in a bathroom or a toilet with so much room echo you can barely understand what they're saying. So I'd just be curious to know, when it comes back round to you again, Dave, whether you use Skype for that, and whether you, under those circumstances, you might use an external mic or something. Anyway, round to VK3GLC. I have also forgotten your moniker, 3GLC, so you'll have to give me that. And whereabouts are you again? VK3GLC and group VK3AML.
Yeah, greetings Chris and group. Gary from Rowville, formerly ZGC, still is, licence is still active, but we use GLC for the time being. Yeah, haven't been around much lately, hence the sort of absence, but thought I'd drop in and say hi. I won't hold it, I'll make this just one round. I've got cables everywhere and doing all sorts of crazy stuff. But yeah, I sort of thought I'd say hello and yeah, caught most of your broadcast today. So all good here. One thing I was going to ask you, Chris, been meaning to ask you for ages, been on my list of things to do. Your audio isolation transformer, what brand is that? Go ahead.
They vary. Most of them are, let me see, Trimax. One or two, well, the Trimax, yes. I think there's another type. The very old one in my main interface is ABAC, which I think is an American audio firm of the 50s. I think any one of these audio transformers designed for 600 ohm work that's made after about 1940 is perfectly okay, unless it's had something like green spot or verdigris attack on the wires. Generally they were tropic proofed, dunked in wax or in pitch, so that they've lasted perfectly well. But I always pounce on these transformers when I see them at hamfests, because they're so useful for getting rid of RF feedback and circulating earths causing hum. Back to you, Gary. I hope that answers the question.
Yes, thanks Chris, indeed it does. It looked like a Trimax to me. Very popular in my former industry. Both broadcast and telephony work. And mind you, there are many and varied iterations of aforesaid mentioned device, but in my experience 600 or 600 1200 or 600 120 or some combination thereof seem to be the go. Got one kicking around here somewhere. Well, it might actually being a line level monitor device with a big VU meter on the front. Must investigate that, but I was just curious as to which particular brand it was, and yeah, that sort of makes sense given the overall shape of the device. But yeah, well, thanks for letting me in this evening, and I wish you all well. I'll just wander back and go into listening mode, and hope you enjoy your week and the rest of the weekend. VK3AML group, VK3 Golf Lima Charlie.
Yeah, thanks, Gary. I'll just hold up one of the transformers to the webcam so that there's a recording of it on the net, and get the Trimax symbol there. Unfortunately, my webcam doesn't seem to want to focus on that. I'll see if I can get it to focus close in. Sometimes, no, it's not going to do it. It tends to focus on faces. But yeah, that's you can wire it to 600 to 1200 or 600 to 600 or whatever, depending on where you've got the connections on top. And this is another interface that I built for another device, an FT2900. That's the other rig I've got. And I'll just hold this up. It's an older transformer. That is focusing. And the older transformers seem to have marginally better frequency response and a slightly higher level input. I think that's a plus 10 dBm transformer. Most of the others are plus 8, I think. I'll just check. I'll just have a look. What's the maximum level on this? God, they want you to read this with a microscope. Bridge, unbalanced, blah, blah, blah. No, I can't see maximum level plus 18. Yeah, they vary. So that, I hope, clears that up. Anyway, round to Peter. This program Coroner, I can't actually recall it, Peter. What period are we talking? 80s? 90s? Not sure. I know that when Crawford first went to television, their first TV program, I think, was a courtroom drama called Consider Your Verdict. And a lot of people who were my school teachers in high school, for some strange reason, got parts, sometimes significant parts, on Consider Your Verdict back in the 50s and 60s. I think it started about 1960 or something. It was very early in the history of television. That, of course, was followed by Homicide, which was their big hit, and I think that started about 1963. What else did you ask? Yeah, I'm not an expert on aviation, and I had to really wing it where it came to those planes, and doing it without rehearsal. I'm half expecting that somebody from Motat will ring or make contact and say, hey, you're a dingbat, don't speak about things that you know nothing about. But when you have to provide some sort of narration for these things, you've got to say something. Okay, Peter, VK3ACZ and group. VK3 Alpha Mike Lima.
Yeah, VK3AML in the group from VK3ACZ. And Chris, I want to start off with a very red-faced apology to Gary. The call sign came up and I said, oh yeah, I know that call sign, but I didn't pick it with the voice. And the reason for that is that Gary and I are regulars on a soup kitchen net on Sunday nights, 2000 hours on 144-300. And his voice sounded very different on FM as compared to what I'm used to with sideband. So my humble apologies there, Gary. If you want an excuse, it's dementia. And you know how you get dementia, don't you? It's hereditary. You get it from your kids. Hi. But anyway, Chris, to answer your question about State Coroner, it was a series 96 and 97 were the years of production. And it was on Channel 10, and I never actually saw it at the time. As I've said before, I collected the Crawford Productions DVDs of my favourite series of theirs, including Solo 1 as well, to see a bit of scenery around the back of Emerald and all that sort of stuff with Paul Cronin on his motorcycle. For the nostalgia purposes, and for a long time they've had State Coroner advertised, and I've not been really interested, but as I did have I carried the can a little bit for Wendy Hughes. I thought, it'd be worth seeing. And, well, I'm not too sure now, but let me assure you that Dave's name does roll through on the credits each episode, as I mentioned before. But anyway, and you're forgiven for not knowing your planes perfectly. Who does? There is a B-52 in Darwin, or there was in the museum when I was there in the noughties, and it was marvellous to sit next to or stand next to a B-52. And I'd always, when you see them with those great big wings taking off and the engines, making that dirty exhaust fume mess behind them, it's been one of my little desires to get a cab ride in one of them. Well, when I looked in at this B-52 and saw how cramped it was, oh my goodness, no, you don't want to flight in one. And Dave mentioned William Terrell. Oh boy, every time I hear the name now, that picture of him in the Spider-Man suit becomes really prominent in my head, and I wish I could get it out of my head. It just it gives me the heebie-jeebies, and I just hope that there'll be some sort of resolution about all that. Still enjoying the 7300, Dave, and that's also, you're the enabler there. I hope you can live with yourself, hi, because it was seeing your 705 at the Cup Day Park that convinced me I absolutely had to have the 7300, because that band scope, the front of that radio was just marvellous, and it's really enjoyable too. Such an intuitive such an intuitive menu. by goodness, there's a lot of bang for buck in a 7300. But anyway, in the next round, Chris, I'll tell you about my attempts to work DX this last week. I've had the Midas touch, it seems, where almost nothing I can do goes wrong. You know, I've just got to touch a radio and I'm getting 5 nines from Europe on the long path and all that. Well, I struggled a bit this week, but I'll say more about it next round. But hey, wonderful to see the material that you showed there in the video. I only wish we really had something that matched as far as museums go here. I mean, we've got some good stuff, no doubt, but I don't think I saw anything in that video that's in any ways relatable to what we've got over here. More's the pity. Back to you, Chris, VK3AML and the group, VK3ACZ.
VK3ACZ and group VK3AML. In my days when I was freelancing and had to make myself available to museums for work, either contract work or actually being employed on a couple of occasions, I had to be very careful about what I said about museums because many of the trends I personally disagreed with, not because it was against my tastes in museums, but because I knew with my contact with museum clients, either donors or visitors or people using the facilities, that the changes were being made with no user's perspective. And I think that can be levelled at many government departments, including archives, museums, service providers, who really have no idea of what the client's need is and how it can best and most cheaply be satisfied. A lot of opinionated people in control, whereas in New Zealand, with the smaller population, you are more reliant on volunteers, and being members of the public, the volunteers under those circumstances tend to have more say at the organisational, at the management level. They get listened to by the management. Here it tends to be that the museum is run by people who have, these days more often than not, been academics, have never been out in the real world. So consequently, they don't know very much about, let's say, for example, what mechanical engineers, future mechanical engineers, electrical engineers, communications engineers would like to know about their own field and its history, particularly when they're younger. And the tendency now is for museums to employ conservation staff and museum staff who come through the humanities direction academically, and consequently they're people who have no interest in the technology as such. So you'll very rarely see displays in this country of radio equipment except in private collections where they're run by enthusiasts, and in many cases I think the best collections are run by enthusiasts. Even in New Zealand I came across one particular collection run by a man named Peter McWhorter, and he runs a museum that he calls Aeromedia at a place called Ashburton, which is south of Christchurch, north of Dunedin. He's next to the airport, and the airport also has a good aviation museum, one of the best in New Zealand. But Peter has a collection of early black and white television cameras, phonographs, gramophones, early cars. He's been a real restoration person who has a talent for putting these things on display creatively. And I took a video at his place as well with Mike, and in subsequent weeks I'll run that as well. It's difficult to tell what people want to see on live stream. I've been trying different things, and last week I thought not one person in 100's going to be interested in French Island. Boy, was I wrong. That presentation on French Island has had twice the number of hits of any other live stream I've done. I don't know why. That's something I wouldn't have predicted, but obviously there are a lot of people interested in interesting places around Melbourne. So one of the places I'll have to do is Warrandyte, VK3ECG and group VK3AML.
Yes, VK3AML and the group VK3ECG. Yes. Well, yes, going back to your question about interviews and things, it's fascinating because almost everything happened this week in a strange way. I was contacted on Monday by, or our public relations person was, by Sky News, and they wanted to do an interview. So that was done on Zoom. So I was sitting in my sort of office at home on Zoom and did that, and most of these sort of TV things they're only actually 2 or 3 minutes. That's about all you actually get for them. And then I just think I did a couple of radio things, which were mostly just done with mobile phone, I have to say. Although I had some really interesting radio type podcast recordings where what they do is they get you to put to use an ordinary landline, and then they ask you the questions on the landline, and you use your mobile phone to record the audio, and then you email the audio file back to them. So, and then they obviously mix it all together again, which I thought was really interesting, because obviously the recording on the mobile phone is much nicer than what's appearing across the cell network and or even the landline. So that seemed to be used more for sort of podcasts. And then the Channel 9 thing was different again, because there I said, oh, I'll do it by Zoom, and they went, oh, no, we don't like doing Zoom things like that in the morning. We want it live. And I said, well, I'm not driving into the city for that. They said, oh, no, we'll come to you. So, and I know some of the cameramen, they used to have, camera and sound people, and they'd all roll out, but these days it's nothing like that. The cameraman just comes out with his Pelican case and opens it up, and he takes his camera out and sort of light stuff and things like that, and then there's this big brick, which is really, I suppose, a glorified multi-channel cell phone type device, I think. I'm not quite sure how many cell lines it uses or channels it uses, but your earpiece receiver is connected through to it, as is the camera, as is your microphone. So I just stood there in front of the camera, and the camera didn't work, and the 4G thing didn't work for quite some time, until about 2 minutes before going live, and he turned everything off and turned everything on again, and all of a sudden it started to work. So that was how it works. But actually on the Zoom was interesting, because I know exactly what you mean about the audio. It's dreadful, and also they're just using the cameras on the laptops can, if you're too close to them, because you get that incredible magnification of the centre of the face. And I actually have a Rode microphone, one of the NT1As, actually on a boom in my sort of office, because I do so much of the teaching now. I do on Zoom, because we've had to over the last couple of years, and so I get it up properly and put a DA conversion in and box in and the microphone, and it all runs. It runs very, very well. It gives me nice audio. In fact, several people have commented on that. And I'm not at the moment, but I did actually have a small Fuji camera which I had connected as a sort of SLR type camera, and use the lens on that, which gave me the ability to choose the right sort of length and get the zoom right for it, and that all fed into my laptop, which is on the internet. So that worked really well, and the audio difference, just not relying on the laptop microphones, it is actually very considerable advantage. And in meetings, people say that, you know, I just sound as if I'm there, whereas everyone else sounds like they're in some sort of box. And I think that really works out quite well. Yes, I mean, the State Corridor Show was quite funny in a whole variety of ways, actually. But yeah, I don't know they've done anything quite like that before in Australia in terms of that side of the sort of court approach. And it was interesting that a lot of people sort of thought that it was unrealistic, but in fact, quite a lot of the stuff was realistic. It's just that people didn't really understand how that sort of jurisdiction worked. In fact, I remember, I don't remember the Consider Your Verdict, but there was a very similar program on in the UK when I was a student, and I think it was just called Crown Court. It was always on lunchtime, and again, it was a scripted court appearance, but with a completely a volunteer jury who would come in and actually hear the case and make a decision. So when they actually wrote the episode, they had no idea what the verdict the jury would bring in. So the trial was sort of run with witnesses and so on. That was all scripted, and then the jury listened to it, and then the jury came to their own conclusions. There was this sort of pause in the program, and then the jury would give their verdict, and that would be the program, and it ran over about half an hour at lunchtime, if I remember rightly. So it sounds like it was quite similar to your Consider Your Verdict thing. As I said, the only other thing about the Channel 9 thing was I said to them, I don't want you, there's no point coming out to where I live. I said, we'll meet at the bakery in Warrandyte. That's the Woodfire Bakery down by the river. And I thought that's a really good idea, because I'll meet them just as the bakery's open. So having done my my interview, I could just pop to the bakery and pick up the morning croissants and bring them home, which is what I did. Back to you, Chris. VK3AML and Group VK3ECG.
Yeah, it certainly sounds great, Dave. It's a great way to organise things. And with the Zoom teaching, I couldn't agree more about the Zoom. A couple of sorry, slow down. Put your ideas in sequence and then speak. Under normal circumstances without COVID, I was doing a lot of lecturing on early film and early sound recording for U3A and groups like that, Probus, historical societies, the Art Deco Society on a couple of occasions, usually to do with film made in the first half of the 20th century or recordings made in the end of the 19th and first half of the 20th century. And a number of those organisations during COVID asked me to do those same lectures by Zoom. I refused. I tried one lecture by Zoom using film inserts, and I found that Zoom just cannot cope with scene changes in films. As soon as you go for a scene change, the whole image breaks up into a shower of pixelated squares, and it looks crap. You don't realise how bad Zoom is until you put something other than a stationary webcam on. It can cope with a head and shoulders image with a stationary background, Zoom. It's designed for that. But you start to put on a multi-image, a multi-scene picture, motion picture on it, and it falls apart. The same, I think, could be said for the sound, particularly for anything non-voice. If you have a symphony orchestra playing at one end of Zoom, if you listen at the other end, it sounds like a single clarinet playing the tune, usually out of tune as well. Bad. It's digital compression for you. There was a time when harmonic distortion, intermod, and clipping were the only types of distortion you could get. Now there's all sorts of digital crap that can creep in, particularly with heavy compression codecs. Looking down, yeah, that program sounds a bit like Consider Your Verdict, except that the verdicts were, I think, scripted as well as the presentation done. And Consider Your Verdict was done on Kinney, I think, like filmed off a TV screen. The copies that I've seen in the last 50 years have been ex-Kinney. You can tell by the dust motes on them, even though they're scanned off a TV screen in the old pre-videotape way. We used to get a lot of Kinney recordings out of BBC in Britain, you know. I particularly remember watching in the early 60s Hancock's Half Hour, which had obviously been Kinney recorded off 405 line British TV as it was then, BBC One. And there's a series I was particularly interested in as a kid of 9. There was a series called A for Andromeda, featuring a very young Julie Christie in one of her first series roles in a television production. And A for Andromeda is a very interesting science fiction series about the interception of radio communication from the Andromeda Galaxy, which was information on how to build DNA. And it basically creates a mirror image of a person who gets into all sorts of mischief, strife. Very interesting series. Anyway, I looked up what had survived of it, and the bloody BBC's non-retention policy is such that there is only one complete episode plus a few film inserts from that series surviving today. The follow-up series called The Andromeda Breakthrough survives completely, and in that series they replaced Julie Christie with my pin-up girl of the 1960s, and even at 83 she still looks bloody good, and that's Susan Hampshire. Oh, I would have liked to have dated her. So, the IC7300, I'm just curious, the receiver I think is software defined, but I don't think the transmitter is. I think the transmitter's fixed IF bandwidth. You might like to tell me, Peter. So with a pause in case anybody would like to call in, VK3ACZ and group VK3AML.
Yeah, VK3AML in the group, VK3ACZ. Yes, I believe that's correct, Chris. And, Julie Christie, be still my beating heart. Oh, yes. Settle down, Scotty. Just quickly about my DX aspirations. They came to a screaming halt, what was it, last Tuesday or Wednesday night, one of those two. I tried to join a net at 10 p.m. A stateside station on 40 metres, Kilo Echo 5 Echo Echo, Stan in Florida. He runs a net. It's a very good DX net. And I got a reasonable contact with him. That was okay, but I packed up at 4 a.m. the next morning, simply with the frustration of having spent about 6 hours, and that was the only contact I made. But a lot of subcontinent stations, Sri Lanka and India, were all 5 by 9 with me, and none of them could hear me. Mind you, there was a bit of interference from our northeastern island neighbours, need I say anymore, but I was certainly brought back to earth with a screaming thud. I was almost starting to get arrogant about how good conditions were, and it really is just conditions. It's not like it's anything I'm doing that's so special. Mind you, when you've just got a long wire and barefoot, you need a little bit of help, of course, don't you? But anyway, presentations, Dave, you're having to email them your audio clip and all that sort of stuff. You remind me, not too much information, but I've been receiving grief counselling for some time, and for the latest Are You OK Day, this mob wanted to put together a video of certain people that have been helped by the whole process to encourage others to seek help if required. And it was under the same format as the You Can't Ask That, which is an ABC series. And it was very staged because it was all by Zoom, and so set up, they emailed us the questions. We had to cut the sheet up into little pieces and handle them in front of the camera and look surprised as if it was the first time we'd seen it and all that sort of stuff. And just what you're talking about, Dave, just reminded me of that whole process, which I think scarred me a bit, because I said some stuff in answer to the questions that I thought was fairly profound, or at least valuable, worthwhile, to assist other people. And you can probably imagine in the final editing there wasn't much said at all. There was a couple of words here or there. But a bit like when I saw Elle McFeast, Lisbeth Gore on Flinders Street, at the front of Flinders Street Station Concourse one day when she was filming a segment for Live and Sweaty. She had a long interview with me, and one word appeared in the Live and Sweaty episode hosted by Andrew Denton. So there you go. I'm heavily edited. Trust that you guys won't be. And as for your presentations, Chris, not at all surprised that French Island went so well, but then I had a vested interest because I'd been there. Perhaps I can, I can be forgiven for being so interested. I think that you're on a winner because everything you show seems to hold everybody's attention, and it's a bit like I thought I was with HF for a while there. Every post is a winner. So, not to put pressure on you, but I just hope you keep it up. Please don't ever get discouraged because these Saturday night presentations are just fantastic. Anyway, enough for this round. Back to you, Chris, with my thanks. VK3AML in the group, VK3ACZ.
VK3ACZ and group VK3AML. Well, what these Saturday night presentations have made me realise is how much video I have shot over the last 20 years and never bothered to edit together. And these Saturday night sessions give me an excuse to take, say, 24 or 36 hours and just edit the stuff together in some sort of a form that I can, off the cuff, do some sort of narration on. I read the narration through the mixer off the computer, playing the clip onto YouTube live stream, and I just mix it with my local microphone. YouTube live stream records it all, and of course that means it combines my narration with the original films that have been edited, videos I mean. So it's a very convenient method of making video resource I've just had on terabyte drives for years usable. And I can keep that going for quite a while yet because I've got a lot of material going back to, I think the earliest stuff that I would show of my own would be 2008. When I went to America, I shot a lot of video there, but that's only in 480p, and it's in 3:4 ratio. So it's going to look a bit primitive compared to some of the 4K stuff I've shot more recently. The Moraki boulders, for example, was shot in 4K and then reduced to 1080p, and it looks very good on that basis. But the further back you go with my video, the more primitive it looks, and the stuff that I shot on videotape just looks awful. Mind you, that goes back to about 1980. And usually when you have so little definition, you tend to take close-ups of people so that you don't notice the loss of definition so much. On 4K, you could stand back 40 feet from the camera and still you could see all of the movements of the face and everything. In some ways, the development of common 4K video is intimidating because it means that automatic facial recognition systems in public places must be recording the exact position as I speak of a lot of people we know, including ourselves. A bit frightening, isn't it, if ever artificial intelligence gets to a stage of becoming threatening, and I'm told by Elon Musk that it will. Ah dear, we have enough to worry about with climate change and all the rest. William Tyrrell, yeah, I've been hearing a bit about that, Dave. It seems fairly inconclusive at the moment, but apparently they've got a new suspect after a long time. One wonders how long it'll be before they have a suspect or a solution to that couple, including the chap who ran amateur radio, who disappeared up in the Alpine country north of Walhalla. Will that ever be solved? So, around to Dave VK3ECG. I'm just thinking, got a picture of Susan Hampshire, the way she was in the 60s in my mind's eye. Oh, brother. Oh, brother. VK3ECG and group VK3AML.
Yes, VK3AML and group VK3ECG. Yes, I know what you mean. I don't remember the series A for Andromeda, at least not with any great recollection, But I do remember reading the book originally, I think. So the plot line was familiar to me. Maybe I did see the series. I don't remember. I do remember the sequel to it, I think. And yes, I know exactly what you mean. But I also understand, Peter. I mean, it's typical that most of the things you think went really well finish up on the cutting room floor, as they say, and that's only to be expected. I remember spending, I think, I can't remember what it was now. It related to a true crime series on one of them. It might have been, I don't know, maybe in something like a Four Corners episode. Anyway, they came down and filmed me for, it would have taken an hour, set up, all the rest of the bits and pieces, asked me all these questions. I was incredibly non-committal and wouldn't, say the sort of outrageous things they were hoping someone would say. And the entire interview was entirely cut. It never appeared on the programme, even though it must have cost them a fair bit to come down and to do that. And there was a presenter and an entire film crew and so on, and none of it made it to air. So I take these things with a large pinch of salt as to whatever happens in these things. It's quite extraordinary how they're after one thing at the end of the day. If you don't come, are not prepared to say the sort of stuff that they want you to say, well, they're not interested. And that's fair enough. I mean, in one sense, that's their show, not mine. But it does make you think how many other people's work finishes up on the cutting room floor, as it were. But yes, I mean, I know you remember the zoom compression. As I have the same sort of thing as you say. It's fine for fairly static images. As soon as you show anything actively moving, then it certainly causes far more problem. The trouble is when you're transmitting it, you don't necessarily see it in the same way. But because you're sharing a screen or something like that. But down the end of the line, of course, that's where the problems occur. I mean, fortunately, most of the stuff I shoot and do for video stuff for some of my teaching is fairly static anyway, so it doesn't cause me as much of a problem. But I've had to completely rethink, how I do a lot of those teaching sessions in Zoom. You just can't do your traditional, approaches of, which was, I would have things like you've got a 3-hour session and you'd give a lecture for an hour, and then you'd break it up for tutorials for an hour and have people moving around, then you'd all come back together and there'd be a question and answer session, probably not quite the 3 hours, but something along those lines. And that just doesn't work on Zoom. You can't have people watching a Zoom feed like that for more than about 15-20 minutes before they go, they lose concentration and so on. So you've got to break it up. And you start having to use all the breakout rooms and things like that, which work reasonably well. But it's quite easy to stuff them up. I kicked everyone out. I kicked 120 people out of all their selected little breakout rooms by mistake once by hitting the wrong button on the screen, and then I had to put them all back in again, which was incredibly frustrating. Probably more so for them than me. So yeah, and doing those little blocks and then having them, done a little tutorial thing for 10-15 minutes, then you go back to it, and so on, backwards and forwards. And you've got to do that just to keep them on their toes and to stop them going off and making coffee and cake and not watching and things like that. And persuading students to leave their video on, for example. So, because they all want to sort of go into sort of silent invisible mode, which may hide all kinds of interesting things. And then, of course, not all of their pictures are necessarily, their static pictures are necessarily the ones you want to have plastered across your screen. So there's a few things like that definitely go on when you're doing that, when you're doing Zoom stuff. But it's been inevitable because the campuses were entirely closed, so everything had to be delivered that way, and still is actually at the moment. It's just starting to obviously come back now, but I suspect there'll be far more courses offered that way because it actually expands their the groups of students that can do it, and you can mix the overseas people in and so on and so forth. So that actually has been quite successful, but it does mean you just redo everything, and that's actually doubles or triples the work. which is fascinating. But and sometimes I think gives you an opportunity to improve things, so that's never a bad thing. Anyway, back to you, Chris. VK3AML, the group VK3ECG.
Just leaving a pause in case anybody wants to break in. Yeah, I can't help but feel sorry for friends of mine like Steve Langley who are teaching, particularly teaching music, where music is not conveyed well by Zoom. How he must be dealing with everything. I got a message from him about 5 days ago to the effect that he's horrendously under the pump at the moment with exams, end-of-year exams, and conducting them partly electronically and partly live, and oh dear, what a time teachers must be having during all of this. It must be bloody terrible. That thing of the middle of the face expanding, a friend of mine always called that the shaving mirror effect. Tends to be produced by wide-angle lenses when you want to get a head and shoulders close up, so you move in close and all you see is enormous nose, eyes out the side of the head, and no chin. It's like talking to an inbred. Now, what else did I ask? I don't think anybody's answered that thing about the IC 7300, the internal architecture of it. Is it software defined? And if it is software defined, is it only software defined for the receiver, or can the transmit bandwidth be hacked to give you better than normal bandwidth? That's a vitally important question to me. And yes, just getting back a few steps, the book for A for Andromeda was written by an astronomer, which probably is the reason that it is so plausible and so good. And the astronomer was Fred Hoyle. And I think he was involved with the early days of radio telescopy. He used to come out to Australia in summers, and on television they had a series in the early to mid-60s during the day of purely academic lectures by lecturers like Herman Bondi. I remember he was an astronomer also, cosmologist actually. The series of lectures was chaired by Harry Messel, who was in charge of one of the science faculties of, I think, the University of Sydney. Other lecturers that appeared on that Summer School of Science program were Julius Sumner Miller, before the days of his television celebrity as a 15-minute "Why Is It So" person. But Fred Hoyle was a particularly interesting one, and I think A for Andromeda was not the only book that he wrote, but it got made into a very good series in the early 60s. It was remade as a one-off for television in about 1998, and they really did a shit version of it. I would recommend the original version if it ever turns up. Now, who do I turn it to? I think it's Dave, have I got the right one? VK3ECG, VK3AML.
No, I think it's over to Peter. Perhaps you take it, Peter, VK3ACZ and the group VK3ECG.
Apologies.
Oh, good. VK3AML and the group VK3ACZ. And I'm just thumbing through my ICOM guide. It's definitely an SDR receiver, but I don't know about transmitter. I should know. And, Chris, I concur wholeheartedly about Susan Hampshire. I think both of us need a bucket of cold, icy water thrown over us. But that's another story. Just last word about State Coroner. Interesting, Dave said that there was questions about it, how realistic it looked. I don't know, there have been a couple of times when I thought, oh, gee, they went to a bit of effort there, because one of the things I find in most, we'll call it Hollywood, most drama-type shows like that is that the bodies don't look very real. You know, you can tell it's just somebody there looking like they're asleep. And if you look closely, sometimes you can see the you can see the pulse on the side of their neck, or you actually capture respiration now and again. But I think the real fault with State Coroner for me, apart from how they jump so quickly from one scene to the next, is that they're trying to do a little bit of drama in the personal lives of the people, and it's just not cutting it. It's just not convincing, and I think the acting could use a bit of a lift. I tend to find that Ian, if that's how you say it, Ian Griffith, the Welsh actor in Harrow. Dave, I'd be interested in your comments about that, if that raises your mirth or your or your interest, because I find it. There seems to be a fascination with coroner shows. I don't know quite why that is, but we've had Quincy, we've had all sorts of different characters playing these sorts of parts, and it obviously gets people's fascination. But I did enjoy the series Harrow for what it's worth. I hope that doesn't put me in the outer. Anything else I can say for this round? No, just again, Susan Hampshire, be still my beating heart. Oh boy. Back to you, Chris, VK3AML and the group VK3ACZ.
Yes, she was last seen in Monarch of the Glen as the wife in that series. And even there she was in her mid-70s, heaven knows. She's worn very well. Some of the actresses from the 60s have gone very badly, and I'm just trying to think of the name of the girl who played the Black Queen in Barbarella. She looked like such a piece in 1970. By the time she died about 2 years ago, at not a great age, she looked like she was about 110. She looked awful. But then I think she was pretty heavily into cigarettes and other drugs during the 60s, and that tends to have a very wearing effect on people. So glad that cigarettes have become widely unfashionable. Now, whenever you see a film clip with people in the street smoking cigarettes, you can almost say, pre-year 2000, because these days very few people can afford to smoke the damn things. Now, KE5EE, interesting. I must get into HF, Peter. One of these days, if you're operating during the day, particularly on a weekend or whatever, can I be so rude as to tag along just to see what it's like when you set up this portable outfit that you've got, and where you do it and how you do it, which frequencies and whatnot? I'd be most interested as a preparatory to my own activity. Okay, I'm starting to dry up for material, so perhaps just after midnight we can think about winding up. So VK3CG and group, with a pause just in case anybody wants to say a final word, VK3AML.
Yeah, VK3AML and the group VK3ECG. Yes, fine. I've just been looking across at my bench here, and the only really little sort of radio job I had to follow up this week, which I didn't quite finish actually, was I bought myself some RG174, partly because I didn't, although it's highly lossy, I wanted to again use it for some portable, following up from the discussion we had on the Melbourne Cup Day, Chris, where thinking about trying to get the antenna modified so that I can actually put the feed point high up rather than on the ground, where, as you rightly point out, would make a significant difference. And to do that, of course, I need to carry a length of coax, and I thought, well, we're not talking about huge runs of coax here, and at the end of the day it's going to be a fairly compromised system, but it would be better to be feeding things higher up rather than low down. So I thought I'd try and get myself some very light coax, even though it will be a bit lossy, and actually just feed things higher up. So that was my task, and I've got to put some BNC connectors on and things like that. So that's what I've, and then I opened my BNC connector packet and discovered that one of them had a hole in the little pins disappeared. So I've got one connector and not the other connector, so I've got to go and sort that. So I never quite got that job completely finished, but there we are. Oh yes, sort of the reality things. The bit about the State Coroner reality thing was that I remember when it first episode came out, and there was a green guide thing in the Age saying, oh well, this is crazy because coroners wouldn't go to a scene and wouldn't do this, that, and the other. And of course, at the time, I think basically people didn't realise that the coroner system had changed in Victoria quite a lot. And the magistrate, Hal Hallenstein, who was the first of the state coroners in Victoria under the new system, was going out to things all the time. It's just that the history of the older jurisdiction was that never happened. And so when this series which was trying to represent much more of the new system, everyone kept saying, oh, that doesn't happen, whereas in fact, of course, everything had changed and it did happen. So that was the sort of interesting example of the community's view being incorrect, and partly that's what we were trying to do, was trying to get it right. So as you said, Peter, it was really about the bodies and so on, and sometimes yes, they made like whole latex sort of skin, so you could have somebody lying on a table, and then they'd be able to sort of pull back this sort of fake latex stuff, and it was really quite interesting seeing the arts department do things. And I remember on one occasion they wanted to carry a brain or something across from one side of the room to another to put it on some scales or something, and they kept saying, well, we can't get anything to look like human brain. And at the end of the day, someone said, well, I've got a load of I think they must have used calf brains or something for a butcher's, and they said, well, these do, and they were like, the calf brain was like the sort of size of your fist or something like this, about sort of a tenth of the size of a human brain. I said, well, it's not really going to look very. It's a bit like those little pictures of Homer Simpson with the sort of X-ray with a tiny brain inside the cavity, and so at the end of the day we had lots of cotton wool, and then had to use a low-angle camera shot so that it looked like there was something there, but it wasn't really, you couldn't see the exact size, and so all kinds of funny things that happened in those shows. But actually I've never really watched Harrow or on those, but I don't watch these shows much, I have to say. It's not that they irritate me as such, it's just that it's a little bit sort of boring for some of them, because sometimes I do actually sort of work out some of the sort of exciting bits that they're going to do the red herrings on, because they're sort of what I call classic red herrings in the area, so you sort of know what they're likely to do. But actually one of my friends who is a forensic pathologist in Queensland actually had his house used in the Harrow show, I think as one of the scenes of crime or something. So that's the only background I know of that at all. Yeah, I think the IC7300, certainly yes, its receivers are software defined, but it has got a sort of AD conversion digital processing in the transmit line. So I presume they can do quite a bit of digital modification of the signal, but whether it's a true sort of transmit SDR, I don't know. I suspect probably not, but it certainly has. Depends, I suppose, how you define it, because obviously you do have the ability to do digital manipulation of the transmit audio in some of the earlier stages of it, so maybe that covers it anyway. Okay, well, I think you're right. I think it's getting to that stage, and I think I will probably pull the pin myself. Fantastic, really enjoyed the museum trip, and that trip as well, seeing all the trams and so on. Fascinating to pull them all together like that. But so thank you very much, Chris, for putting together another fantastic video, and it makes me feel very bad that even I don't have much video that I've collected over the years, but I've got quite a bit of ordinary photographs, and actually Sally Martin and I we were just going through photographs, trying to cull things out the other day, and not get rid of them. We've still got the sort of master copies, but get the sort of the ones that are actually on the laptop, which we can manipulate and use down to a manageable level. I think Sally managed to remove 6,000 images from her laptop, because she's doing making all these YouTube videos at the moment of her dance group. So and she's putting all these wonderful pictures of chateaux and English country houses and so on as the backdrops for a lot of the music and the dance things that she's doing. So but she says she can't find a whole load, and she suspects that I've got them stashed away on some of my drives, and I think she's probably right. So I'll have that as a little bit of a job tomorrow. Anyway, I'll wish everyone a good night, and I realise, Chris, you won't be there next week, but and I may actually. That's the week I was thinking that I probably might not be able to make it anyway. So we'll see how things go. I will actually have. I think I've got my choir's got a concert coming up on the 11th, so we'll be on that. That's another Saturday, so I shall probably be disappearing. Although I could be back home by then. I don't know. We'll see. Anyway, good night, everyone. VK3ECG Clip.
Yeah, good night, Dave, and thanks for coming on as always. Very much appreciated. I'll look into the IC 7300. I'm thinking of putting a very considerable amount of money into an ANAN setup, but if I can do it more budget, and it will do it as well, particularly considering how small the IC 7300 is for portable work, I might look into it. Might just do that. Yeah, Peter, Jetstar, not my decision. Oh, I would never go with Jetstar again. Not after that effort. There was one Jetstar flight I did to Hobart years ago. This would have been at least 10 years ago. After Magda Zubanski did her series of adverts for them. We got a cut-rate flight to Hobart, and you could see on the floor of the plane where they'd moved the seats close together, all the bolt holes had been reset. And for somebody of my height, I'm 6'2", 6'2 and a half, I think, my knees were pressed against my chest all the way to Hobart, and it took me some hours after getting out of the plane to deconcertinarize myself. Anyway, with that, I'll hand it round to you for a final, Peter. And thank you for coming on. VK3ACZ, is there a meeting of the Sherbrooke group soon? VK3AML.
Yeah, VK3AML and the diminishing group, VK3ACZ. 6th of December, usual place. Yeah, same bat time, same bat location. Well, we're off Monday going up in our radio camp up at Mount Alexander, so that should be fun. You'll probably hear a few reports from that. Oh, and 7-3, Dave. So good to have had the chat about State Coroner on. By the way, I nursed a few babies that didn't make it, and when I was at the Children's Hospital, and they had an episode of State Coroner where they eventually persuaded a mother to hand over her stillborn baby, and I looked at it and thought, wow, that is a very lifelike dummy. Or they actually got a real infant out of the fridge. I don't know which, but that bit at least looked very convincing. And I just wondered if you watched those sort of shows, Dave, just to get a laugh from them. In another sense, I can understand that you'd probably be the last thing you'd want to see, because you'd be sitting there poking holes at it all, as you'd more easily do than the rest of us. But there you go. Anyway, Chris, thanks so much for your efforts again tonight. Thoroughly entertaining, as always. The standard's never slipping. It's always good, always interesting, always informative. And again, I'll just say again what I said before, is a pity we can't walk through our own museum that's got that much stuff in it, and all in the one place, alas. And now, what was the last thing? With the going portable, that'd be great, Chris, to have you aboard, or maybe I should have brought all my gear when we had our Cup Day thing for an afternoon effort. I like getting on the Anza net on 20 metres in the afternoon. That's always a bit of fun. Lately, conditions haven't been great. We've just been going around Australia. We had someone from the Cook Islands with us today, and there's a fellow in Fiji that often comes up, even when conditions aren't that good. But on a good day, we'll have stateside stations, and we'll have Africa coming through and all that. But anyway, yeah, it'd be good to have you aboard for that. And so you're not going to be on next week. We should be back. Sandra and I should be back from our playing radio trip up north. And but whenever you're on again, I'll be looking forward to whatever you've got to share with us. It'll surely be good. Have a great week, Chris. Look forward to catching up with you again soon. And cheers and 7-3 to all. Good night, VK3AML from VK3ACZ.
No worries, Peter. Thanks for that. And yeah, if you get time, I know this time of the year, particularly coming up to Christmas, tends to be a time when most of people's weekends tend to be tied up with some get together with friends or family or whatever. So it's a little bit more difficult this time of the year to nail people down to this sort of thing, but perhaps January. That'd be good. Okay, at this stage I'll call it quits. Just mentioning for people on the live stream, I probably won't be on next Saturday, but I will be on the Saturday after, as a result of Christmas obligations here for myself and my wife. I'm not going to let the live streaming destroy my social life. I'll do it whenever I can. And I'm very happy with the results now. I've looked at the recorded stream, and it's very difficult for me to tell the recording from the original. There's not much loss there. Nothing like the loss you get with Zoom. The quality on YouTube live stream is actually very good. So it's a winner, as long as I can keep it up. Okay, with that I'll close. If anybody wants to say anything finally, please do so. But this is VK3AML signing clear on 147.475. Have a good week, people.
VK3AML, VK3BYY.
Ah, VK3BYY, how are you? And are you you're the guy that does the ATV stuff, aren't you?
No, I watch it occasionally, but I don't do ATV. No, I mess around with repeaters and things when I can get to the those sites, which we haven't been very successful with over the last 2 years. Yeah, I just been listening on and off. Heard you mention the IC 7300, and yeah, it is full SDR. In terms of it generates. The transmitter is all done through SDR, but there is a fair amount of limits on what you can adjust. So, for instance, I can't find anything on my radio here that allows you to adjust the bandwidth for any mode, including FM. In fact, I thought they might have had an adjustment for FM bandwidth, but no, it doesn't appear that way. But it does have it has bass and treble controls for the receiver and for the microphone, and you can put it in the digital modes where it's just a flat response as well. So maybe that answers some of your questions. Back to you.
Yeah, I find that quite often in the advertising material they refer to their transceivers as SDR, and either the software-defined is receiver only and the transmitter is computer-controlled, not software-defined. There's a big difference. And that's why I'm sort of keen on the ANAN approach, although it's a very expensive approach. Most of the stuff around it, ATUs or linear amplifiers, I can build. But the architecture of an ANAN fully software-defined transceiver, the heart of it, the VFO and the rest, would be quite beyond me. But there is that confusion a lot of people have between between computer-controlled and software-defined. With software-defined, you have infinite control of bandwidth, of offset, of with the IQ input, and of mode. The mode is you receive is only dependent on software. With computer control, not so, much more limited. Back to you.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, well, certainly some of the older radios had digital IFs, which are essentially often an SDR receiver, but only at the IF level, and that was often after mixers and everything else, and crystal filters and things had been in the way, so they were kind of constricted to the analog bandwidth of the IF at that stage. But certainly from my look at the schematics inside this radio and the circuit boards, I'm pretty sure it's all digital, and they just have up converters and down converters for the receiver and transmitter, essentially, and a whole bank of bandpass filters going out to the antenna, as well as an automatic tuner built in. So pretty impressive for the cost. But yeah, I imagine they keep all of the nice features about like bandwidth control and so forth for the more expensive models. I don't want to give us too much away, although these days it's almost a case of just add a bit more software. What else was there? I was going to say they have been upgrading the software for these, and every now and then they get a few more features. And the other thing is, it's hard to know what they can do, because I keep finding some of the settings and things sort of hidden away in various places. It's got a touch screen, and sometimes, if you hold down your finger on something a bit longer than normal, then rather than just switching modes, for instance, it might open up another screen or another option. It's they're sort of interesting things to navigate your way around on them, and some of the things aren't mentioned in the manuals. 3AML, VK3BY.
And we say morning.
And hello, John. VK3GG joining the group. VK3BYY, VK3AML. It's just from the point of view, the thing that really has impressed me listening to American stations on software-defined internet-based Kiwi SDRs is that many of the stations, more high-end sideband stations in America, are generating sideband that's 5 or 6K wide and incredibly stable and flat down to 30 hertz. It's indistinguishable from an AM broadcast transmission, and I mean that. And it has the additional advantage of interstate coverage with minimal selective fade. So I'm kind of enthusiastic to pursue that. I'll hand it round to VK3GG for an over. VK3EGG, VK3AML.
Yeah, good day, Chris. Yeah, I wasn't able to receive your pictures tonight. I normally watch it on the Android mobile phone, but no amount of searching with all the details you gave showed it. So obviously you did it through a different thing where it doesn't put out the Android thing.
No, same as every week.
Well, there was no sign of it. I could see your videos from last week and the week before and the week before and the week before, but there was nothing for tonight.
Oh, well, I'll just check. No, we had a peak of 15 viewers, so other people have been dialing in.
Well, I couldn't get it on the Android, but I don't have a computer that'll pick it up in the shack, so that's why I usually use the Android mobile phone that's worked every other week, but not this week.
Interesting, but I can't make any informed comment on that. All I can tell you is I dialed in the perfectly normal way. Sorry you didn't get that, because the videos are reasonably good and you should be able to see it. What happens is that the live stream must go through some sort of a process at YouTube. It remains, after I sign off, it is visible to me only for about the next couple of hours, and then it pops up on my usual collection of videos as just a recorded video. It must be processing or something. I hope that helps.
Yeah, well, it mightn't have sent out the version it puts out for Android, and it might reappear later on. I was going to look for that because I suspected that could be the case.
Yeah, no worries, John. Well, you'll find it there in the... If you can see the rest of the recordings, it'll just appear with the rest of the recordings. There's nothing... The only thing I changed this week was that normally I have the audio encoded with the live stream at 48 kilohertz. This week, experimentally, I dropped it to 44.1. And I'll listen very carefully to it on replay to see if there are any less digital artifacts by the fact that I've slightly reduced the sampling rate. But anyway, I better hand it round to VK3BYY, VK3AML.
Okay, fine, all very interesting. VK3 egg bye.
Yeah, good day, John. One thing you might need to check is whatever app you're using on your phone to check that it's up to date, because I do know YouTube have a habit of upgrading their video codecs and things every now and then, and it may be that they've done that and it's now incompatible with your old browser or your old YouTube app or something like that. So that might be one thing. Although the show itself should still appear on the on Chris's page. It should say it's live if it's being broadcast at the time. So there we go. Yeah, just back on the 7300 there, Chris. Yeah, they quote the bandwidth as 6 kilohertz for transmit, so not exactly hi-fi. The receiver is interesting. In the manual it says that 6 kilohertz bandwidth for AM receive, but as I'm listening to 774 at the moment, on filter 1, the widest one, it's 9 kilohertz wide. And I've found a trick that if I do the IF filter shift, I can shift both the filters over to one side and just listen to one sideband plus the carrier, and it does improve the audio quality markedly. So it seems to be able to receive a 18 kilohertz wide signal fairly well, I think. Actually, I listen to the 160 meter net occasionally, and I just screw the IF shift across to one side to get rid of some local broadcast interference that's right in the middle of the other sideband of AM. So we can do that. That works well. And funny story, when I first got the box, I turned it on and I tuned in 774 and then I pushed the noise reduction switch, and it sounded dreadful. It sounded like sideband. I couldn't figure out what was going on. I thought, it must be a fault. So surely they couldn't produce a radio that just can't receive AM broadcast with a noise blanker. But it turned out that what I didn't realise is that you can, the noise blanker also has a notch filter, and the notch filter was notching out the carrier, and I was just listening to double sideband. And just, of course, adjusting the position of the notch filter improved things markedly again. Back to you.
Interesting that you can tune AM on the thing, but it does sound like they've, compared to the Annan, which is fully flexible, they have made cut some corners here and there, which I suppose is understandable. The problem with the Annan, I think, is that they make them in 1s and 2s, and you have to sort of send them the information and the money, and then they make it for you. which is fraught with some problems. The problem is also that nobody can service these things. They're sufficiently complex and sufficiently they keep the information to themselves that you really have to deal with the manufacturer if you want the thing serviced. So I think I will be, if I get this thing, I'll be treating it with incredible kid gloves. Oh, I've had a long day, so I better start wrapping up. I hand it round to VK3GG, VK3AML.
Yeah, 3ML, VK3GG. Yes, well, it all sounds very interesting, and I would have liked to have looked at the vintage motorbikes and the aeroplanes and things. I'll see if I could see that later on. Yes, so I might say morning, seeing you going, and I just thought I'd pop up and say there was that anomaly. I mentioned what it does on the net is you feed the thing up there, and then it probably goes through some sort of codec for the Android people, and the codec for this and the codec for that, and for some reason it wasn't doing the Android mobile phone this week, which is a fairly new phone, so I don't think it'd be that out of date. So yeah, anyway, with that I'll say morning, and just stand by.
No worries, John. I'll hand it round to BYY to tie the ribbons. VK3AML.
Yeah, no worries, sir. Yeah, oh well, I should try it on my phone next time, and I'll be able to see if it works on my rather ancient Android phone. And yeah, fair enough there, Chris. Yeah, I imagine the Anon has got a lot more features on it. I think for a start it runs from a PC, doesn't it? Whereas normally the 7300 you run from the front panel. So it's got a limited number of buttons and things. And as I say, I'm sure they'd much rather sell you the $10,000 version, which probably does have more bells and whistles. But I did get hold of the service manual, and yeah, there is quite a lot you can fix in it. Of course, you do need some skills at surface mount soldering. And they use pretty conventional parts. There are, of course, a couple of ICOM special parts in there, but you could fix them, depending, of course, what went wrong, which is a good thing. Okay, so cheers to all, and we'll tune in next week. VK3AML, VK3BYY, going clear. Cheers.
Yeah, thanks so much, both of you. I really appreciate that. So, I see we've clocked up 2 hours 54, so that's not bad for a Saturday night QSO. And looking forward to doing the next one. It'll be in 2 weeks' time. That gives me a bit of time to knock some video together. I carry, for those who are on the live stream still, the few, I do carry this Sony camera with me just about everywhere. It's small enough to not quite fit in a pocket, but I can stick it in a sort of a wallet round my neck. And so consequently, whenever I see anything that's of interest, I can hit the record button and get it in 4K. And I have to use very steady hands with this because it's not got the full hand wobble compensation, but it still can do a pretty good account of itself that way. And I must go out and interview a few more people on camera now that the COVID restrictions are being eased up. So again, for the YouTube live stream viewers, there'll be no YouTube live stream on next Saturday, which is the 28th of November, unless Prue cancels whatever it is that we're going to. But I'll be back again on the 5th of December with a live stream and a new collection of video to show. This is VK3AML now concluding this transmission, and shall soon close the live stream as well. Thanks everybody for being there. Oh, I'll just mention the people on the text chat. Thank you, Jared Quinn, John Young, 3FTJS Terry, NPI test VK3AF, thank you for being on there. Dave Ranson, of course, 3CG. Grant, VK3MSG, and nice to see you on the list, Grant, at Port Arlington. I'm obviously coming through very well there, according to you. And Jeff, thanks for the tips on the planes. You're much better versed with the aviation history than I am. Incidentally, Jeff, if you are still listening, I must do an interview with you. You have had such a long experience of both CB and ham radio, and an insight into some of the personalities concerned, that I should get you on a video just talking about your background in that. Very much appreciate that, if we can do it. VK3AML now closing, wishing everybody a very good night. And thank you.
Oh, by the way, Chris, it's coming across on my mobile phone quite happily on the Android, just using the browser.
Okay, no worries, and thanks also to VK2WAY, Jared, for looking in. I've so far had no problems with the authorities doing this, although it says in the regulations that entertainment is illegal. Obviously, there would have to be something entertaining about ham radio, otherwise we wouldn't be here. But I think entertainment, as in me putting on a straw boater and twirling a cane and dancing, I wouldn't bother with it. And if somebody wanted to see me do that, you are nuts. Anyway, all the best. VK3AML now clear. And all the best to you too, Tilly. Not Tilly. Oh, God. I can see your face and the beard and everything, but I can't put a call sign to it. 73 to you. Good night, people, on the YouTube live stream. Wasn't last week amazing? I mean, you know, French Island. Why would people go nuts over that? But they did. I'll have to pick the day trip destination from Melbourne of the week and then go out and do a video of it or something. All the best, people. Where's my closing?